Hi everyone, I was white in this blitz game, which was a Sicilian defense that featured some very interesting tactics. So let's have a look. E4, C5, and we played an open Sicilian, and then after A6 we have the Con variation. So I played knight C3. B5 is known as the wing attack. Bishop D3 supports the E4 pawn. E4 pawn is going to need some support because the bishop is coming to B7 and the knight on C3 can be driven away. Bishop B7, castles, queen C7, and knight CE2, maybe not the most active plan. I was trying to put the knight on G3 to support the E4 pawn. Perhaps I should just put another piece into play and play rook to E1 there, but this was fine. Knight F6 hits E4 for a second time, so I defend it. D5, probably a good move, breaking in the center. We exchange pawns. Bishop to E4, and knight to D7, rook to E1, and here black is in sort of a dangerous situation because I have these heavy pieces on the central files, and his king is still stuck in the center of the board, and he has to watch out for exchanges on D5 because this pawn on E6 can potentially become pinned. In fact, the best move here is probably something like knight from the 7th rank to F6 to support this pawn or this knight on D5. But instead my opponent blundered with bishop to D6. So here I had a very nice tactic to take advantage of the fact that his king is still stuck on that E file. I want to clear the way for my queen to attack on D5, so I play knight takes E6. Okay, so now I have two pieces attacking that D5 knight, and the knight is forking the queen and the G7 pawn, so he really has no move other than to take it. But then I win the piece back with bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, and queen takes bishop. The pawn on E6 is pinned. Okay, he has nothing better than to castle here. And I make a mistake. I played queen takes e6 check. Much more powerful move is rook takes e6. Sometimes holding off and playing a move that gives you a discovered check rather than a direct check is more powerful. And the point is I'm threatening to move the rook with check, and I have two attackers on the bishop. So he's going to lose more material after that move. But I play queen takes e6 check, king h8, queen b3 coming back to support the c2 pawn. Knight c5 attacks the queen. It steps over. Rook a e8. I play bishop e3, trying to preserve some pieces, connect my rooks. And then knight a4 offers the exchange of queens, and I take it. And then play rook a d1. And here I'm just up 2 pawns, but I should have been a little more careful. I should have just guarded the b2 pawn here with bishop to d4 and put pressure on g7 as well, and just try to play safely with a 2-pawn advantage. But my idea after rook a d1 was to get a rook to the 7th rank. He does take the pawn on b2. I play rook d7, and I think he should have played bishop takes the knight here, and then after recovering it, he could post his knight strongly on c4. It's very stable there. He's only 1 pawn down in the position, and my pawns are a bit of a mess, so he might be able to hold for a draw. But instead, he played a bishop to e5, which does release the pin that was on my bishop on e3. So I move that bishop, and I think a more aggressive move would have been bishop to c5, hitting that rook. But I hit his knight instead, knight to c4, knight to e4, bishop c3 attacks my rook. Now my knight here is pinned, and bishop to c3 allows me to unpin it by moving my rook forward to e2, because now I'm threatening to take the bishop and defend the rook. So he brings the bishop back to b4. I cut it off with c3, and he falls back to a5. All right, now here I was dreaming of a scenario of getting my knight to f6 and mating on h7. I was looking at this weak g7 square for some time. It's under attack once, so I was trying to attack it again, And the idea of bishop to h6 came to mind to attack it with the idea of knight to f6 in conjunction. And it's an interesting move, but it's not actually the engine's top choice. It's very tricky for a human to face that move, but the engine says, oh, black can just play bishop takes c3 here to defend that pawn, and that's going to draw my knight away to capture the bishop, and then he can safely take my bishop. But let's point out what the threat in the position is. After bishop to h6, my point was he cannot take the bishop because the knight comes to f6 and threatens a mate on h7. And he can't take the knight because his rook falls and he gets a back rank mate. He can't take the rook on e2 either, of course, because there is the mate threat on h7. So there's really no way to stop mate. He can slow it down a little bit, probably put a rook on the 7th rank, but that's not the way the game went. So he did not take my bishop, but he equally blundered. He played king to g8. Okay, and this just allowed rook takes g7 check, king to h8, followed by knight to f6 anyway. So again, I'm threatening a mate on h7. He can't take the knight because his rook on e8 would fall. He can't take the rook because of the mate. So there's nothing he can do, and he resigned. All right, thanks for watching the game.